the four corners of the earth and the far corridors of history. Dateline, World War II. "22 February 1942, Corregidor. At his fortified island headquarters, 3 miles off the coast of the Bataan Peninsula, General Douglas MacArthur receives word from Washington that President Roosevelt has ordered him to leave the Philippines immediately and proceed to Australia by way of Mindanao. Once in Australia, the general is to assume command of a new theater of operations encompassing the Southwest Pacific. MacArthur's first reaction is to refuse to comply with the president's order. Completely, almost fanatically devoted to the men of his command and the Filipino people, the thought of abandoning them in their darkest hour is abhorrent to MacArthur. Like a captain going down with his ship, he considers it his duty to remain on Corregidor, facing almost certain capture or death at the hands of the Japanese, and is willing to disobey his commander-in-chief rather than violate his personal honor and abdicate his responsibility. MacArthur's senior staff is of a more practical mind. Concurring with Roosevelt's reasoning, they tell the general that the fall of the Philippines is at this point inevitable, and that he can do more for his men and his people by fighting the Japanese from Australia than by remaining on Corregidor. Reluctantly, MacArthur notifies FDR that he will leave as requested, but asks for permission to delay for a brief period. An abrupt departure might convey panic to the troops, resulting in what he terms a sudden collapse. Roosevelt agrees. On 11 March, MacArthur senses the time has come, and along with his family and a few of his staff, he boards one of 4 battle-scarred PT boats that are to make the journey to Mindanao. It will by no means be a pleasure cruise. This small group will have to travel thousands of miles through enemy waters under skies completely dominated by the Japanese. As the boats depart, MacArthur hears a soldier on the dock remark that if he is lucky, his chances of surviving the journey are 1 in 5. As it turns out, the soldier's assessment is no exaggeration. The 2-day trek is so fraught with peril that upon arriving at Mindanao, MacArthur awards the crews of all 4 vessels the Silver Star. The trip from Mindanao to Australia is to be made in a group of B-17s, but the 4 planes dispatched to the island are in such poor shape, only one manages to arrive. An inspection reveals an aircraft so shockingly decrepit that it is sent back to Australia without passengers. MacArthur calls for the best 3 planes available in the U.S. or Hawaii to transport his party. On 16 March, 2 of the 3 B-17s arrive, but they seem to be little improvement over the last batch, held together, as their pilots describe it, with chewing gum and baling wire. There is, however, no time left to delay, and a tired, frustrated MacArthur climbs aboard. The planes, rattling and sputtering, rumble down the runway and climb into the sky. After changing course mid-flight to avoid being attacked by Japanese fighters, the group at long last sets down at Bachelor Field in Australia. Fearing the Japanese fighters might be in pursuit, MacArthur prepares to quickly board another plane for Melbourne. The members of the press, however, are hungry for a statement, and MacArthur, unhappy at being forced to abandon his post and determined to effect a rescue of his men, makes a somewhat terse but resolute declaration. "The President of the United States," he says, "ordered me to break through the Japanese lines and proceed from Corregidor to Australia for the purpose, as I understand it, of organizing the American offensive against Japan, a primary objective of which is the relief of the Philippines. I came through, and I shall return." When Adolf Hitler and the German High Command began planning the conquest of Russia, their calculations were based on the overwhelming superiority of the Wehrmacht over the Red Army, in sheer numbers as well as in equipment and tactics. But now, with the Nazis being driven back all along the front, it is becoming clear that Hitler and his cronies failed to consider a significant factor which has felled Russia's enemies time and again through history: the unflagging and unshakable will of the Russian people. With shocking regularity, the dark specter of war has reared its ugly head in this country, the result of both outside aggression and internal strife. Life in wartime is something akin to tradition here, so much so that when the announcement of the German invasion came, the response of the people was more a reflex than a reaction. Calmly, the people set about emptying their bank accounts and converting their money into food, furniture, hardware, anything of value, knowing from experience that during wartime commodities are much more valuable than paper currency, and that some things cannot be purchased at any price. Now, as the Russian effort continues to increase, young men all over the country leave their homes and families to join the Red Army. Their training is minimal, and their transfer to the front swift. The enemy they face may be highly disciplined and experienced in battle, but these boys enter the fray infused with a fanatical love of country and an indifference to death that betrays their youth. A Russian soldier, having known little in the way of comfort in his life, will endure long periods of hostile weather, bad food, and little sleep, and then throw himself into a suicidal charge against a superior enemy with a ferocity the likes of which the Germans have never experienced. Soviet women are no less committed to the fight. Unlike America, here women in uniform are not an oddity. They work in medical as well as other essential support positions, and they are armed, ready to defend themselves and their country should their positions be overrun. Those of both genders unable to serve in the military join the fight in other ways. Besides working in factories, they dig ditches, build revetments, knit socks and other articles of clothing, pack boxes with soap and candy, anything that will help support the war effort. In the rural areas, farmers remain busy producing food for the nation and the military. Where young men have left to join the army, other family members take up the slack. But here, too, the people are prepared to defend their country. Civilian militias are trained and ready to take up arms against the invaders. No inch of Russian soil will be taken without paying the price. It had been the intent of the Nazis to conquer Russia in 6 weeks. The High Command reasoning that an inferior race of people could never withstand the crushing force of a horde of well-trained Aryan soldiers. But the generals at the front, with each day bringing a new defeat and their troops increasingly demoralized, are beginning to realize what would-be conquerors have discovered time and again throughout history: that every Russian is a Russian soldier. For March 1942, China, charged with the dual tasks of heightening U.S. aid to the Chinese war effort and increasing the combat skills of the Chinese troops, General Joseph Stillwell establishes his headquarters at Chungking in the recently formed China-Burma-India theater. Having been a foreign language professor at West Point and later a military observer in China, the 58-year-old Stillwell is well suited to the daunting task before him. He has a keen appreciation and love for the cultures of the Far East, a trait that will serve him well, for his mission is as much diplomatic as military. Complicating this mission is Japan's initial and successful thrust into Burma. The Japanese are intent on effecting the total military and economic isolation of China, and by sweeping into and across Burma, they hope to sever the last land route to the Chinese subcontinent. By 22 February, the poorly trained and ill-equipped Burmese and Indian troops are routed, mere courage being insufficient to shield their land from Japanese onslaught. Stillwell arrives only in time to aid in the retreat of soldiers and evacuation of refugees. At their first meeting, Chinese General Chiang Kai-shek appoints Stillwell Chief of Staff of the Chinese Army. While this may seem remarkable, the position is largely ceremonial. Chiang's army is primarily a malnourished, untrained aggregate of farmers and laborers, conditions which Stillwell intends to rectify. Even if he is successful in doing so, however, the degree of actual participation by the Chinese forces in America's war with Japan is somewhat dubious, as Chiang seems more interested in fighting the Chinese communists to his north than in repelling the Japanese invaders. As the outside world becomes more aware of the struggle in China, Stillwell garners much of the media's attention. The image of Stillwell presented to the public, while not entirely inaccurate, is one-dimensional. To the world, he is Vinegar Joe, a tough-as-nails, pragmatic, hardened caricature of the American fighting man. His gaunt, sinewy frame, angular features, and weathered skin lend themselves to such characterizations. Standing in marked contrast to this image is the warmth and caring he displays toward those under his command. To his troops, he is Uncle Joe, the general who walks the lines with them, treating even the lowest private as an equal. How strange and disappointing it must be for these men to read the exploits of Vinegar Joe, to see in print a mere fraction of the man they have come to know and consider a friend. But in times such as these, when the country and the world are hungry for heroes, it is sometimes necessary that they be created for the public, even at the expense of the very humanity for which they are fighting. February 1942, Java. After taking Singapore on 15 February, the Japanese have now focused their attention on taking this remaining outpost in the Dutch East Indies. The survival of the garrison here is heavily dependent on protection by the combined Allied fleet under the command of Dutch Rear Admiral Karl Doorman. Steaming off the northern coast of Java, Doorman spots a large Japanese convoy and prepares to engage it. Almost immediately, Doorman realizes he is at a huge disadvantage. Firing from a distance of 5.5 miles, the Japanese are using spotter planes to direct their fire and quickly zero in on the Allied column. The British cruiser Exeter is severely damaged by an 8-inch round and is forced to drop out of the formation. As the Exeter turns away, what had been seen as an inconvenience turns into a disastrous flaw. The combined fleet, made up of American, British, Australian, and Dutch ships, have never exercised together and, most importantly, have no common signal code or battle doctrine. Several of the ships see the Exeter turning to port and follow her, believing Doorman has ordered the change in course. With the Allied fleet in an extremely vulnerable position, the Japanese launched dozens of their long-lance torpedoes at the floundering vessels. Incredibly, only one Dutch destroyer is sunk. Doorman finally manages to regain control of his ships and withdraws. Low on fuel and torpedoes, the Allied fleet makes for the port of Batavia. Unknowingly, they steam right into a Dutch minefield, and a British destroyer is sunk. Moving north, out of the minefield, Doorman again encounters the Japanese fleet. This time, the Japanese torpedoes are far more effective. One by one, the Allied ships are hit and sunk. As his flagship, the cruiser De Ruyter, is hit, Doorman orders the two remaining ships under his command to withdraw and make for Australia. He then slips beneath the waves with his ship. This sacrifice of the Allied fleet has done little to impede the Japanese plan for the conquest of Java. On 1st April, they invade the island and by the 9th have it securely in their hands. The fall of Java and the destruction of the Allied fleet are sources of grave concern to Allied commanders. Australia is now the lone Allied outpost in the region and becomes more and more vulnerable with each passing day. If the Japanese decide to come ashore here, stopping them will be difficult indeed. The Japanese military, that has already proven its prowess on land, has now proven it is the dominant naval force in the region as well. So, you want to save the world, eh? You want to be a hero, Mr. Jones? Well, before we all march off to do battle with pure evil, you're probably wondering what military life is going to be like. The American military is known for its hospitality. Cheerful and knowledgeable guides greet each recruit personally. Don't think them unfriendly if they choose not to make small talk. They know, as you will soon enough, that there's a lot to do and not much time. You're already late for your complimentary physical examination. If you're like most regular guys, when you think of fighting fascism, you think of being medically probed in front of 300 perfect strangers. Now's your chance. Don't forget to cough. Much as we'd like to linger, the tailor is ready for your fitting. 40 regular? This ought to do fine, Mr. Jones. It's a 56 long. Not everyone can pull that off, but on you, we don't think fabulous would be too strong a word. It's just, it needs a little something. Ah, a new hairstyle. No time for fussing on the battlefield, of course. Something sharp but practical will have to do. Something like... Yes, perfect. Very now. Hungry? The Army knew you were going to say that. Pull up a chair. High in calories and fat, low in flavor. Real men don't eat fiber, right, recruit? Right. And in case you don't have teeth, there's no need to chew this enticing gruel. Just shovel it in and swallow. A tip from the veterans, though. Don't get carried away and eat the shingle along with the... What's that you say, Mr. Jones? You don't understand how one army can be this courteous, this sensitive? Well, it's no accident, that's for sure. There's a whole breed of officer, morale officers they're called, whose entire existence is consumed with ascertaining and providing anything any GI might need to keep him happy. Well, almost anything. No, not that either. Ah, that's more like it. Just what the GI ordered. A little something to take your mind off important duties like saving the world from evil. Mr. Jones, America may or may not be the world's policeman, but Americans are certainly the kitchen's policeman. Your first combat assignment might not be what you expect. The War of the Potatoes? The Battle of the Pots and Pans? Is this any way to fight a war? We'll leave that question to the historians. For now, you'll want to get to bed. Well, maybe bed is a bit generous. You'll want to get to slat, because tomorrow's sure to be off to a fast start. You've got a lot to learn about how an army works. You're going to have to learn to march, to salute, and how to walk like a monkey. You're going to have to shed those extra civilian pounds and get yourself into top physical condition. And you're going to do it by learning how to push a ball with your nose. So sleep tight, Mr. Jones. It may be hard to believe at the end of your very first day of military life, but you really are a hero. Even if your red badge of courage is nothing more than dishpan hands.